This is the audiobook version of the Baatezu in the Details Make Believable Dungeons by Augie, Light Edition. Table of Contents. Introduction, how to use this, Meta Consequences chapter, Physical Consequences chapter, News of the Monsters chapter. Important. This is an audio version of the free version of the Baatezu in the Details Make Believable Dungeons, missing all the important tables. Example play. The party has been following the footprints and the shed scales in the tight tunnels of the Underdark since they found the broken off tail of a giant lizard. They were hoping to find a deep gnome city where they were allegedly used as mounts. They learned that from Belize Ironfoot, who was a deep gnome herself. They met her in Leafgrove, the elven settlement on the surface. She said she got lost and couldn't find her way home. The party decided to try and bring her home because this dungeon seemed quite dangerous after Leafgrove got raided by Grimlocks. She didn't help a lot in combat, but she was very chatty and charming. Suddenly they heard a noise. Everyone drew their swords. This time it wasn't the Grimlocks, but a strange floating creature. A flumph. "What are you all doing here?" it asked. No one ever comes this close to the Mind Flayers. They realized they've been following the wrong tracks the entire time. Mind Flayers could use giant lizards too. And suddenly they pieced together everything. The weird behavior of Belize in Leafgrove and why she was spared by the attackers. The adventurers turned toward her and saw the knife in her hand. The intellect devourer controlling the hollowed body of the poor creature realized it got busted. Its last chance was to attack instantly. Written by Gabor Kosper. Find me at algi.hu, that's algi.hu. What is this supplement? One of my favorite features of Dungeons & Dragons is that you can use interchangeable building blocks to create a dungeon. You can just look up the levels of the player characters and slot in encounters based on the challenge ratings and on what aspects of the party you want to test. These modular building blocks are very useful to make adventure writing simple and easy. Its drawback is that it is easy to abuse this feature. As Dungeon Master, it's easy to rely on this feature too heavily, building adventures from these building blocks. There are three glaring flaws of such an adventure or dungeon. The monsters are haphazardly distributed, the descriptions of the environment are plain and boring, and the surrounding area is disconnected from the monster population. This supplement will help you with the extra work in creating a dungeon that will feel living and breathing with a lot of details and every creature seemingly an organic part of it. The trick is that after populating your dungeon with monsters, you can add details to the environment and their knowledge to local NPCs that will make sense for those monsters. On one hand, these details connected to each monster will help you write interesting, more detailed descriptions for your environments. You don't have to come up with a dozen different ways to say damp caves or old ruins, because they will be filled with all kinds of clues based on which monster's territory the party is traversing. On the other hand, the players won't be helplessly stumbling across every monster. Their preparedness and watchfulness will serve them well to deduct what kind of threats they might face next. Even if they are surprised by a monster and scramble in panic to survive an encounter, they won't feel cheated, they will feel like the encounter made sense. And next time they will remember what happened when they noticed the same clues before stumbling into a dangerous monster. What is a dungeon? In this supplement, the word dungeon refers to any location populated by hostile creatures and other challenges to the party they have to traverse to attain a goal. Certainly it can be a labyrinthine part of the Underdark populated by oozes, duergar and drow, but it can also be a raider camp full of goblinoids and orcs, or even a seemingly safe city full of backstabbing intrigue where doppelgangers and rakshasas are pulling the strings. So if a dungeon can be so many things, how can we know what is and what isn't a dungeon? In this supplement, dungeon isn't a thematic description but a structural one. A typical adventure can be divided into sections. A safe area where the party can prepare for the adventure, a journey where the party can be attacked by random enemies, and a location at the end of the journey populated by monsters. Of course, you can leave out any of these or mix them. This last location is what we call a dungeon. What are monsters? This supplement calls any creature listed in the monster manual a monster. This isn't a value judgment of the creature, this is a structural designation. Any creature you place in a dungeon as a challenge or a help is called a monster here. Keep in mind that while the terms dungeon and monster are wide and can encompass almost any kind of environment and creature based on their role, This supplement is still narrowly focusing on dungeons and the monsters populating them. You place the monsters in your dungeon and you can find here what details you can add using functions. You can use this supplement in itself, but if you're using functions as described in Algi's Functions Write Amazing Adventures, it will help structuring the descriptions added here. When you're writing an adventure, you can use lists as descriptions of the dungeon location environments and the behavior of NPCs in and outside the dungeon. The first couple of functions of these lists will be the most essential information you need to come across for your adventure to work. How the party can move across an environment, what is an NPC's default stance, etc. After you establish the essential functions of these carriers, you can add the clues you get from this supplement as functions to these lists to diversify them and add details. You will find yellow sidebars in each chapter explaining the specifics of utilizing functions. Chapter 1. How to use this. When you're creating a dungeon, this guide will help adding details to the dungeon and its surroundings which are congruent with the monsters populating it. Step 1. Use the lists in Appendix B of the Dungeon Masters guide to choose monsters, or you can use your own preferred method and place the chosen monsters in your dungeon. Step 2. Look up your chosen monsters in the table Meta Consequences. That chapter will suggest other monsters you might want to add. Step 3. Look up your chosen monsters, including the monsters added based on the suggestions of meta consequences, in the table of physical consequences to learn what details you could add to your dungeon. Step 4. Look up your chosen monsters in the table of news of the monsters to learn what effects the news of the chosen monsters can have on other monsters in the dungeon or the civilization outside the dungeon. Areas and borders. For the sake of simplicity, this supplement will assume a couple of facts about the setting and the adventure. If your setting or adventure differs, adjust the advice accordingly. This supplement assumes that there is a global civilization spanning the setting which is mostly safe for the player characters. They can travel across it, gain information from it, and equip themselves. Monsters live in dungeons which might be separate from, near to, or in the heart of this civilization. A dungeon can be home to multiple different monsters. A monster can typically have a lair where it lives, where its offspring or valuables might be. This lair is surrounded by the territory of the monster. The monster might use its territory for hunting, patrolling, etc. How did the monsters get there? When you are placing a monster in your dungeon, you should ask yourself, how did it get there? There are 3 possible answers. The list of the DMG is meant for finding monsters native to the area. These monsters can have lairs and territories in the dungeon, but there are 2 other kinds of monsters: visitors and quest-based monsters. Visitors are monsters that typically enter the area even if they don't live there. They don't have a lair in the dungeon, but they frequently leave behind physical clues, and the native monsters and surrounding civilization might hear about them. It's not unusual to meet them in the dungeon, but their lair is somewhere else. The third kind of monster is the quest-based monster. For any monster that doesn't fall into the first 2 categories, native or visitor, you have to come up with an explanation in your quest for their presence. In this category, you can place any kind of monster in the dungeon. Meeting these monsters might be extraordinarily unusual, and they might be so new to the area that they might not have any clues left behind, physical or otherwise. Basically, the clues for the quest-based monsters should be in your quest instead of the environment. Using functions. When adding a monster you're unsure whether it will be native or not, you can add a placeholder function specifically meant to be a clue for that specific creature, and you can move that function around in the adventure as you please. If the monster turns out to be native, it can be a detail in the description. If the creature ends up as a quest-based monster, it can be a dialogue from an NPC warning the party. Chapter 2. Meta Consequences. A meta consequence is when the presence of a monster might mean the presence of other types of monsters. Some monsters live in symbiosis or form societies or take other monsters as slaves. After you choose your preferred monsters, it's best to start by checking if their presence might mean the presence of other monsters before you look up all the details in the other chapters. First, search for your monster in the Meta Consequences table. They are listed in the order presented in the Master Manual. First the monster entries in alphabetical order, then miscellaneous creatures in alphabetical order, then non-player characters in alphabetical order. This chapter explains what to do with the content of each of the columns in the table. When an entry in the monster manual contains multiple stat blocks, a specific monster with a specific stat block will be referred to by the plural version of the entry name and the specific monster name in parentheses, both with capitalized initials, for example, Hag's Sea Hag. If you find only the main entry name in plural, that refers to every monster in that entry, for example, Hags. Sometimes a group of monsters is too enormous to list every entry, then you will see a colloquial word or category name in small caps, for example, Fiends. Nexus Column. A nexus is a layer which is used by many different kinds of monsters. Not all possible nexuses are in this supplement. You can create your own unique nexuses, for example, the headquarters of a criminal syndicate that serves as a lair for thugs, bandits, and bandit captains. If you find an entry in the Nexus column, try finding a way to add the Nexus to your dungeon, then look it up in the Nexus table. You'll find the monsters associated with the Nexus listed there. You can add any of these monsters to your dungeon. As Nexuses are lairs, they are associated only to native monsters, not visitors or quest-based monsters. Don't forget to block the path to the Nexus for the party if it would be too dangerous for them to find it. After adding Nexus, you don't really have to worry about the relationships of the monsters you add from the Nexus table. Their commanders, minions, teammates, etc. can all be back at the lair. Some monsters are exclusive to a Nexus, but other ones might be at home in multiple different Nexuses or no Nexus at all. In the former case, choose one Nexus for each monster. In the latter case, you will see the word maybe. Commander column. A commander means a different type of monster that instructs or commands your selected monster. If you see a monster in the commander column, that means the monster might be or is commanded by another monster which you might want to add to the dungeon. If you see the word maybe, then the presence of that commander is just a possibility, but otherwise you should account for the commander in some way. It doesn't have to be present, but it exists or existed in the game world. Spellcaster. This means the creature is summoned, created, or commanded by a spellcaster who can be either a humanoid or a monster. They typically are reliant on the intention of the spellcaster and don't occur naturally even if they are native. Mount. This means that it's not really a minion of another monster but can serve as a mount for that monster. Merc. This creature usually works for whoever pays or feeds them, expanding the range of commanders to such a wide selection that it's not worth to list them. Tool. This monster lacks intelligence but might be used by any intelligent monster as a useful tool. Trained. Certain methods the creature can be trained by a wide variety of creatures, even if not as a mount. Pet. The monster can be kept as a pet even if untrained. Teammates column. The teammates are other monsters that like to fight side by side with your selected monster. Teammates are always optional, but if you want to play some friends who will help out your monster, these are the most believable options. Minions column. Minions are other monsters your selected monster might control. If you choose a monster and wonder how to bolster its defenses, then adding these creatures would make the most sense thematically. Minions are always optional, but they are strongly suggested not only to make higher threat monsters more challenging, but it is more interesting even for the narrative when a powerful creature has more options. Using functions. If you are using a network as a map for the dungeon, you can add a nexus as one of the nodes. The nexus itself can have a network associated with it as its internal map. If the nexus is home to monsters too powerful for the party to fight, you can make the pathways leading to the nexus impossible or very hard to cross with a lot of warnings for the party, while you can still use the position of the nexus to remind yourself where the creatures of that nexus are coming from and where the center of their territory is. The complete version. If you got the complete version of the Baatezu in the details Make Believable Dungeons, you would find here the list of nexuses with their associated monsters, 1 page, and a table of monsters, 14 pages, telling you what nexus they might belong to, what other monsters might command it, what minions might serve it, what other monsters might accompany it, and what monsters might be near. Chapter 3. Physical Consequences. In this chapter you will find details you can add to the descriptions of the environments of your dungeon. These are divided into categories based on the source of the clue, body, technology, victim, other, but you should mix them up as you see fit. Body column. Most creatures leave clues behind by their sheer presence in the dungeon. These clues are left behind by different kinds of activities. What kind of clues you will describe is based largely on the spirit and style of your adventure. If it is a mythic legend of heroes, then banal bodily functions might ruin the immersion. But in a gritty detective story, the party might dig through the trash to find some kind of evidence. I think there is a place for both styles and more in Dungeons and Dragons, and I think it's best to associate different styles to different monsters. The categories below can appear both on their own or together. When there are multiple categories for the same monster, that usually means some activities behave in one way while other activities behave in another. In that case, it's either obvious which activity is in which category or it's your discretion. In special cases, unique bodily activities that don't follow from the categories will be described specifically in the table. Category Biological. Biological monsters have constant life functions which leave clues in the environment. There are 4 main activities which are noticeable. 1. Metabolism includes 2 main parts. One is eating, including predation, eating plants, etc. The other is leaving excrement. 2. The most noticeable clue of reproduction is the offspring, eggs and eggshells, children, etc. 3. Damage can have 3 different severities. A monster can leave behind hair, feathers, scales, etc. It can sustain injuries leaving behind blood, body parts, etc. And in the end, they will all end up as corpses themselves. 4. Traversing will leave behind prints, paths, tunnels, etc. In cases when a biological monster can be taxonomically categorized, its subcategory will be shown in parentheses. This taxonomy is modified to better adhere to the categories of D&D. In case of hybrids, chimeras, etc., multiple subcategories might be shown, but many monsters are impossible to categorize in a biological taxonomy. In those cases, there won't even be an attempt to do that. Each activity described above can be add a different detail to the description in the monster's territory, its lair, or sometimes even the surrounding areas. When adding details, take into account if they are possible or not in the specific environment. A creature in the category biological mammal cannot leave footprints on hard rock, so you should rather find a different kind of clue like shedded hair. The party might have expertise in the specific clues. A player expressing interest in a clue with a character who has expertise in the area might get extra information about the monster. You can use skill checks to decide if they get more information about the monster. An intelligence investigation check might provide the amount or route of the monsters and or the direction and distance of their lair. An intelligence nature check can help identifying the monster if it's natural. As a rule of thumb, if a monster belongs to only one taxonomical subcategory, this skill might help. After a successful roll, you could share more generic information about the monster. A wisdom medicine check can tell about the monster's state of health if possible. Footprints can tell an expert if it's limping. A feather left behind can show signs of disease. The amount of blood left behind can tell if the creature is seriously injured, lower than half of its hit point maximum. Ask for a wisdom perception check if the party wants to find more details that weren't in the original description of the environment. If the players succeed at a high enough difficulty, they might learn about every possible clue in that location. A wisdom survival check might be the most useful in this case. It can identify the monster, its route, the direction and distance of its lair, even if it is hybrid, mutant or magically created. Category Undead. These creatures are divided into 2 subcategories. Corporeal undead are very similar to biological creatures in the sense that their body is a mostly natural physical thing. It's a rotting corpse or skeleton which moves around as any other biological creature. It is damaged way more easily from day to day. The natural decomposing adds to the natural shedding, leaving disgusting fluids or body parts behind. They don't have any metabolism or reproduction. These are replaced by magical or supernatural mechanisms which aren't widely understood and don't leave clues behind in the environment. The undead don't have offspring and won't loot the pantry, but their creation and existence might have some visible consequences. The obviously visible consequences of the unique ways of creation are explicitly stated in the table. The other subcategory is the incorporeal undead. These monsters don't necessarily leave clues behind by their presence. Of course, you can use your imagination introducing ectoplasm and other material details. Ironically, their creation and existence might have more obvious clues which are explicitly stated in the table. The following skill checks are useful for investigating the clues left behind by the undead. In case of the undead, the intelligence, investigation, and wisdom perception checks work the same way as for biological creatures. The intelligence nature check is replaced by intelligence arcana for identifying undead creatures. The wisdom medicine skill is strictly to identify a corporeal undead as a corpse based on the level of decomposition, etc. The wisdom survival check is strictly for following the tracks of a corporeal undead. Characters belonging to classes that are linked to the undead, they can create it or destroy it, etc., can roll these checks with advantage. If a character is explicitly able to create the specific undead monster they found the clues of, they can recognize it. Category construct. This category might be somewhat simpler than a biological creature. These are items, machines which are powered by some kind of magic or the supernatural. They get damaged and they move around like biological creatures, but they don't have metabolism. The shavings, lost parts, remains should be handled like they were a piece of equipment. See Technology Column. Similar to the undead, their creation might leave behind important clues. Because most constructs are created in a unique way, these clues are explicitly stated in the table. The following skill checks are useful for investigating clues left behind by a construct. An intelligence arcana check can identify the monster. An intelligence investigation check can reveal that the clues are left behind by a construct. A wisdom medicine is only useful in the case of a golem's flesh golem. It can identify that the clues are left behind by preserved human remains. A wisdom perception check is to find clues not mentioned in the original description of the environment. A wisdom survival check is strictly for following the tracks. Category Elemental. These are physical creatures just like biological creatures, but they are much simpler than them. Their bodies are homogeneous, they are made up of one element. While the earlier categories are purely physical, this is the first category where it is worth to use a bit of abstract thinking. A fire elemental in Dungeons and Dragons isn't like real fire in our world, just like an earth elemental isn't like real rock either. Your job is not to recreate real natural phenomena and substances in your fictional setting, but to represent our cultural perceptions of the ideal classical elements. For example, theoretically, metal can catch on fire, but on our everyday scale it rarely does. So culturally, elemental fire is associated with heating metal armor, not burning it. Similarly, water can crush you with high enough pressure, but in the fantasy world of Dungeons and Dragons, water elementals only bludgeon you when they attack. Culturally, we associate wetness with water, not crushing. When you're coming up with clues left behind an elemental, use your gut feeling, your first instinct, your subconscious associations, and don't try to analyze what a real substance or phenomenon would actually do in that situation. The following skill checks are useful for investigating clues left behind by elementals. Intelligence Arcana is the most useful skill identifying elementals. It can be used to realize that the details found aren't the clues of the natural occurrence of the substance or phenomenon, but an elemental version. Intelligence investigation check can get you halfway there. To identify it isn't a natural occurrence, but it wouldn't be able to identify the elemental creature without more information. While a wisdom perception check might be useful to find clues not mentioned in the original description of the environment, those new clues might not be very useful as elementals are mostly homogeneous. For example, if the party finds wet clothing left behind the water elemental, they might look around and find wet tablecloth too, which won't tell anything new. The wisdom survival check is only useful for following the tracks. Category Otherworldly. This is the category where you might want to completely abstract your thinking from physical mechanisms. Don't try to simulate the biology and sociology of these creatures, try to think of them as manifestations of ideals. The core of their being isn't about substances circulating in a sack of flesh, but about emotions, thoughts, ideas. Any of the four biological activities, metabolism, reproduction, damage, and movement, only manifests when there's some kind of meaning or intent behind it. Forget nature documentaries and biology books, forget simulating autonomous systems. Think instead about fairy tales, myths, legends, epics. There are 4 subcategories which differ vastly. The celestial subcategory collects the creatures which are looked up and followed by members of the civilization. Think about what kind of clues are left behind by the heroes of myths, legends, and epics. An avatar might leave footprints to encourage you with their presence. A feather of an angel might fall off their wing to reassure or inspire anyone who finds it. Instead of thinking about what the party should be able to find, try to think about what you think the party needs to find. The player characters are the main heroes of the adventure, and the legend written by you and the players will tell the tale how the party found the clues of a celestial. This is a perfect opportunity for you to help the adventure along instead of bogging down in realism. Whatever you need to help with running the adventure, you can just do that with the clues of a celestial. You can imagine as if the celestial's intentions are aligned with your intentions, as you both try to help along the heroes. A celestial might be the closest thing to an avatar of the DM you have in the setting. There might be evil creatures among the celestials, but they are still in the celestial category. Their clues might radiate malevolence, but they are still noble, elevated, and poetic. They don't become as banal as the ones in the fiend subcategory. The following skill checks are useful for investigating clues left behind by celestials. I suggest you avoid requesting an intelligence investigation, wisdom perception, or wisdom survival check to follow the tracks. I would share the information freely. But if a player initiates such a check, you should give them even more information after a success. An intelligence investigation check might help finding out the intent of the monster. A wisdom medicine check will always tell the same. In case of failure, the character cannot find any negative health issue. In case of a success, it becomes obvious the monster is in perfect health. Intelligence Arcana and Intelligence Religion are the checks that might actually help identifying the monster. In case of the Fae subcategory, try thinking in fairy tales instead of legends. The clues left behind by them are more human scale, less bombastic, and more random, less intentional than the ones left behind celestials. While in the case of celestials, the intention of the creature usually aligns with the dungeon master's intentions, fey creatures are more arbitrary. Their behavior is more like immortals. If it helps, imagine as if they have the same meta-knowledge you do, except they pretend to be average creatures. Again, it helps to think about what kind of clues would the Fae leave behind that would help your adventure, except it's more probable they left them behind accidentally than intentionally. The following skill checks are useful for investigating the Fae. An Intelligence Arcana check can help identifying the monster. An Intelligence Investigation check can work similarly as in the case of biological creatures. If the character already knows the creature is Fae, it can help shed light on its intentions. A Wisdom Perception check is again helpful for finding new clues not mentioned in the original description of the environment. Wisdom Survival checks are only useful for following the tracks. The Shadow subcategory only has one creature in the Master Manual, but in Dungeons & Dragons an entire plane of existence is full of creatures in this subcategory, and is very different from all the other otherworldly subcategories. Creatures in this category are like a dark version of the Fae. You can read the Dragon Shadow entry of the Master Manual or supplements about the Shadowfell and apply the concepts of this chapter to the information found there. The Fiend subcategory is mainly populated by devils and demons. This subcategory is just as abstract as all the other ones in the otherworldly category, but one of its main characteristics is that they leave behind clues so banal that they might be indistinguishable from biological clues. You can use banal, mundane clues to cause disgust or repulsion towards the creature. Choose clues based on what you and the players perceive as ugly or reprobate. But don't go too far. Dungeons & Dragons is about fun adventures. Emphasize this part of the content only if it is obvious for every player beforehand that they had agreed to a horror adventure. The following skill checks are useful for investigating clues left behind the Fiend. Intelligence Arcana and Intelligence Religion checks can identify the monster based on the clues. An Intelligence Investigation check can work just like with biological monsters, or if the character already knows the monster is a fiend, it can be used to find out the fiend's intentions. A Wisdom Perception check is useful to find clues not mentioned in the original description of the environment. Wisdom Survival is only useful to follow the tracks. Category Magical. This category only exists as a modifier in this table. Purely magical creatures do exist in Dungeons & Dragons, like the one created by the spell Arcane Eye, but no purely magical creatures are listed in the Master Manual and thus don't appear here. The magical category appears for any monster where the main category in itself would be misleading. For example, awakened trees do leave behind biological clues. Their leaves fall, their corpses are felled trees, but they are magically animated. When you see magical next to another category, then just be aware that there is something more at work than what the main category might suggest. A magical modifier can have different consequences. A magical monster might leave more clues, for example an awakened tree traverses, or might leave less clues, for example magic can replace metabolism, or it can create clues for people knowledgeable in magic. The following skill check is useful for investigating clues of magical creatures. An intelligence arcana check can tell what part of the monster's existence has magic, or even identify the monster. Technology column. Technology refers to the signs and clues left behind the sheer presence of created items connected to the monster. It's very similar to the body aspect in that these are physical clues left behind by presence. Items similarly to creatures have a life cycle consisting of creation, use, destruction, which all leave behind clues. Another effect of the technology level is that the creatures leave clues in a more structured way, while animals with non-technology level leave their clues all around their territory. Monsters with high technology level bandage their wounds that stops them from bleeding, get rid of their waste in concentrated locations of their lair, put on clothing that stops them from leaving behind hair, feathers, scales, etc. Category high. High technology in this context means that the monster either has access or can reproduce the technology level typically accessible for the party as described in the player's handbook. High-tech equipment has a similar life cycle as a construct. It is either created in the lair of the creature, there is the needed equipment and the signs of creating activity, from resources harvested in the territory, or bought from travelers crossing the territory, or plundered from the global civilization. It is used and damaged in the territory. It is either destroyed in the territory or cast away in the lair. High technology is typically created in a centralized manner by specialized experts, and they are typically uniform across a certain group. They are not as uniform as our modern-day manufactured earth items, but for example, a noble would equip their guards uniformly with the same weapons from the same blacksmith. The equipment usually carries the symbol of its creator but lacks unique personality, and in case of multicultural societies it might lack references to religion or fealty. More people will buy your helmet if it isn't wearing the symbol of a specific god or master. Again, this is only true compared to other kind of equipment in the fantasy world. Compared to our modern Earth, there is still more imagery of authority and religion on these items than what we are used to from factory-made products. The following skill checks might be useful for investigating clues left behind high-tech monsters. An intelligence arcana check can be used to identify magic items. An intelligence religion check might identify religious items. A wisdom medicine check can identify medical equipment. A wisdom survival check can be used to follow the tracks of a vehicle. An intelligence history check might identify a faction based on castaway items. An intelligence investigation check might tell the player what activity the monsters were doing leaving behind the clues. A wisdom perception check might help find new clues that weren't mentioned in the original description of the environment, but unlike clues left behind by the body of a monster, items leave behind a more limited amount of clues. Category low. Low technology is what the experts of the global civilization of the setting would call primitive. But don't be fooled by the description, these items can be very well crafted. They are typically created by the users themselves or their family members in a decentralized fashion, so their creation doesn't require huge workshops, but this creation process is happening in a larger area. The tools of creation are to be found in the entire lair and to some extent even in the territory. Even the creatures themselves might have tools on their body needed to create items. These items are typically made from source material readily available in the territory. They are all unique, handmade, carry a lot of information about the culture and position of the owner, including their fealty, religion, heritage, etc. The skill checks work similarly to high-tech except because these items usually carry way more information about the identity of the person carrying it. Succeeding even at one of the particular checks, intelligence arcana, intelligence religion, wisdom medicine, intelligence history, can tell a lot about the creature's culture and identity. Category carry. This means that the monster can carry equipment, probably a weapon, but doesn't have access to crafting or manufacturing. The monster was provided a weapon, then left to its own devices. This means that only the usage of the equipment leaves clues, damage to the environment, left behind splinters or parts of the equipment, or even a broken item. You can treat the equipment as high-tech equipment except the manufacturer isn't linked to the monster carrying it. Category Trained. This creature might be tamed and wear a harness if you decide. If you choose to make it a wild creature, it will behave as if it was in the non-category. If it is tamed, then it behaves very similarly to carry, in the sense that the monster itself doesn't have access to the technology it carries. The difference is that the equipment carried by the monster isn't used by the creature but is being used on it. This is important because it means that the equipment itself betrays what kind of monster it is. In case of skill checks, most of the time you can treat this as high-tech or low-tech sometimes, but the party could use a wisdom animal handling check to identify what kind of monster the item might be connected to based on the clues. In the case of ubiquitous technology, like the prints of a horseshoe in the sand, the obvious answer should be shared with the party. Note that characters who aren't experts will probably assume the most usual possibility. For them, a horseshoe will mean a trained horse, not a trained zebra, even if the monster is a trained zebra. Category None. This category means the monster doesn't have any technology connected to it. Victims Column. Refer to this column whenever the party finds a dead victim of the creature. You will find the damage types the victim might have suffered to help you describe the body. For physical damage, the word you will find won't be slashing, bludgeoning, etc. because a claw damage and a bite damage would look very different. That's why you will find more colloquial words to describe physical injuries. In case of weapons, you will just find the word weapon, because the creature can technically have any kind of weapon. Some creatures kill their victims in unique ways. In that case, the specifics are summarized in the table, but if you find such an entry, you might want to look up the monster in the monster manual to see what happens exactly. The following skill checks might be useful to investigate the injuries of a corpse. An intelligence or arcana check can help identify force, necrotic, psychic, and radiant damage. An intelligence investigation check might be the most useful here. The character could find out how the victim died exactly. An intelligence nature check can help identifying acids from biological glands, beaks, bites, claws, diseases, goring, hooves, horns, pincers, poison from biological glands, ramming, spores, stings, stompings, tails, talons, tentacles, tusks, and other attacks typical of beasts. A wisdom medicine check can identify any kind of damage but not necessarily inform about their source. A wisdom perception check might help finding damage not visible at first, for example clues of psychic damage, or to determine if a burn is from natural or elemental fire. A wisdom survival check might identify the attacking monster if it is native to the local area. Environment Column. This is specific content that you might want to add to the description of the territory, the lair, or even the neighboring areas. These environmental details aren't consequences of categorizations but explicitly stated in the monster's entry found in the monster manual. Using functions. When you come up with the description of an environment, you can write them as a list of functions. What specific facts do you want the players to know about the environment? The first function should be the most important information, the one about utility. How you can move through an environment. Is it a corridor? Is it a cell? Is it a junction? Etc. The second function, which is usually an adjective before the above, should be the main expression of the environment. Is it a cave? Is it a ruin? Is it a new building? Etc. Then you can add details to it. I suggest to add one clue to each location based on this supplement. You can use a different clue in each location to diversify the descriptions and avoid the monotony, or you can intentionally repeat the same clues to emphasize the importance or the large amount of the same monster. This will get you 3 functions to describe each location, which should work as a short but evocative description. Even if you want to add more details using your imagination, this is a good basis to build on. Some examples. You are walking across the narrow passageway of the natural cave filled with dead bugs. As you are climbing the rocky mountainside, you notice a bright yellow feather the size of your arm. You can use generators to help adding details. A monster is a carrier of functions that you can write as a list in your notes. Every category you find in the row of the monster can be added as a generator to the list. If you do that, then even when you have to improvise a new location in the territory of the monster, you can just look at its list and use its generators to come up with details on the fly. In the case of monsters categorized as biological, undead corporeal, or construct, use objective generators. You have to analyze how they interact with their environment. In case of creatures categorized as undead incorporeal, elemental, or otherworldly, use subjective generators. Come up with a theme or style or intent or archetype associated with them and just use your subconscious to associate what kind of clues they leave behind. The complete version. If you got the complete version of the Baatezu in the details Make Believable Dungeons, you would find here a table, 23 pages, telling you about each monster, what category they belong to, what technological level they have, what injuries their prey might have, what specific details should be added to the environment. Chapter 4, News of the Monsters. This might be the most esoteric chapter and require the most effort on your part. Don't treat this chapter as a list of things that you have to do, but guiding principles in case you want to do this work for your adventure. This chapter is all about the news of your selected monsters traveling to other creatures, NPCs, etc. This is a very complex phenomenon and I don't pretend that this guide can cover every facet of it, but I hope it will help with the first push in the right direction. Column reaction of neighboring monsters. This column will tell you how other monsters native to the dungeon adjust their habits and behavior because of the presence of your chosen monster. Do they avoid it? Do they attack it on sight? Are they at war with each other, etc.? This will help you set up the monster's territories. Do you want to create a war by placing two hostile monsters next to each other, or will you group allied monsters next to each other for synergy? It's all up to you. The abbreviation VS means that the monster is an enemy of the monsters following the VS. Learning about monsters. The party can access two main sources of information about the monsters. While the party is still in the friendly, peaceful civilization near the dungeon, they can learn how the local monsters affect people's everyday lives, question experts about their general abilities, and find survivors of their attacks. In the civilization column of the table, you will find specific effects that the nearby monsters might have on the peaceful people. You can also add friendly monsters to the dungeon that can help the party after they already enter the dungeon. The column labeled helps ? Marks the creatures that can be typically used like this. The information shared by these creatures is less generic, more specific, where certain patrol routes are, where some creatures nest, what kind of specific situations the party should prepare for, etc. Survivors. You should take into account that sometimes the prey of a monster will flee and survive its attack. These survivors can return to their homes and live on in the safe society. You can and should use multiple sources to create these survivor NPCs. You can use the victims column of the physical table to find typical physical injuries. The survivors column of the news table will list some injuries and after effects which wouldn't kill someone but might be part of the stories told by these survivors. And don't forget that survivors aren't always easy to find or to interview. The experience with the monster might have traumatized them, or they might be afraid of another attack if they talked. Finding a survivor and getting information out of them might both require some investigation and skill checks. Using functions. If you want to make a monster memorable, I suggest to use the combination of 3 different kind of functions that all point to the same monster. First, let them hear about the monster, then let them find its clues, and finally, let them fight it. The complete version. If you got the complete version of the Baatezu in the details Make Believable Dungeons, you would find here a table, 14 pages, telling you about each monster. If they are typically helpful, what effect it would have on a nearby peaceful community, what effect it would have on neighboring monsters, what non-lethal damage it could cause to its survivors.